So, this is my first video. I don't really know anything about YouTube, so I'm just gonna do a description of what's gonna happen here. I'm gonna stick a bunch of hashtags on to the description of the video and just kind of hope for the best and just keep posting more uploads and see what happens. So basically, I have a lot of crazy ass stories that I want to tell. I feel that a lot of this stuff would be helpful for a lot of people. One thing I'm going to address real quick is why I'm not showing my face. This is going to get really detailed, really graphic. Definitely not kids content. I have kids. They're young. I definitely don't want them to see me or recognize me. This stuff is, stuff that you keep to yourself as an adult. And you might share some of it with your kids, but definitely not in the way that definitely not in the way that I'm going to do it on here. There's not going to be any editing. And so basically a lot of this has to do with the fact of a lot of stories with drugs, a lot of stories that have to do with child abuse, parents who, in my experience, mothers and females who may be narcissistic or have borderline personality disorders, other types of disorders that run through families, how they affected me, my self-worth, struggles with drugs, pulling myself out of certain situations and hitting rock bottom with a lot of things, how I turned a lot of negative things around and was able to kind of slowly put my life, I'm still in the process of doing it, but it was basically like my life had been taken apart over and over again, and I spent a large majority of my life thinking that there was something wrong with me, but in the end I found out that I have my issues, but in the end I found out a large part of it had to do with how I was raised, which type of parents I was around as a kid, the type of things that I experienced, and how it was never explained to me correctly. And if events that transpired in your childhood aren't explained to you by anybody, you kind of end up spending a lot of your life thinking that there's something wrong with you, but when in reality you're actually perceiving reality correctly, and there isn't anything necessarily wrong with you. It's just that nothing was ever explained. And it took me a very long time to put all of this together, and I do most of this on my own. A lot of it was through countless hours of just research on my own. I did go to therapy for a little while. That was helpful to kind of get me turned in the right direction, because originally I started going to therapy for alcohol dependence, which it turned out that I wasn't really dependent on alcohol. It was because I was trying to just I was just trying to basically self-medicate because of the terrible situation I was in. Like I just couldn't deal with what was going on. So anyway, uh, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna start telling my story from the very beginning, beginning with. I'm just basically gonna start it off with my first, as far as I can remember, my first encounter with any type of drug or substance or anything, and it's pretty um I mean, it was cigarettes, smoking. I think, if I remember, yeah, that was the only thing, that was the first thing that I did. I think maybe there had been one or two other occasions in my earlier childhood where maybe an adult had offered me like a sip of some type of alcohol, whether it was like, oh, like a sip of beer or a sip of wine. I think that's pretty standard. Because like the adults, they like to, they'll think it's funny because they're like, hey, you want to try a little bit of this? And the kid's curious, and you're like, yeah. And you try it, and it tastes like absolute fucking shit. And beer tasted like shit. Wine tasted like shit. When you're a kid, you don't understand why the fuck adults drink that shit. It's just the nastiest crap ever. So I don't know if that's like what the adults intend. Like, I guess they think it's funny. I guess if I were to offer my kids a sip of alcohol, I would just do it to watch them just be absolutely disgusted by the flavor of it, and basically have the same reaction as I did when I was a kid. Like, oh, how the fuck can you guys drink this shit? That's disgusting. Well, anyway, so I'm gonna leave those situations out, because I think it was only maybe one or two times when I was little when maybe my dad offered me a sip of beer and I was like, oh, this is fucking disgusting. So that would probably put me, to start off, that would probably put me in, when I was maybe about 12 or 13 years old, going through puberty, going through my rebellious stage, being pissed off at things and not knowing why I was pissed off at things. And it started off with smoking cigarettes. So me, and it wasn't all of my friends. It was like me and, it was like, I think it was only me and like maybe one or two other of my friends who, like, we thought it was going to be cool to like go to the store. What we did is we stole cigarettes. That's how we were getting them initially. And a lot of this stuff is like, I'm going to try to remember it just off the top of my head, but as I go along, I might remember more details, but right now it's just going to be pretty kind of loose. So yeah, it started out with stealing cigarettes. And yeah, that was in middle school. And I remember we would steal the cigarettes. And the way that we would steal these cigarettes, because this was a long time ago, and there was a little like corner store. It wasn't a corner store. It was like it was like a tiny grocery store. Like, not your standard size grocery store, it wasn't a corner store. It was like a tiny grocery store, and they had the cigarettes where nowadays, where they keep the shit where where they have the candy bars and and like gum and shit. Well, they used to have cigarettes right there a long time ago. Well, at least in that store they did. And what we would do is we would go into the store, me and two friends. One person would buy some. We would stand like three in a line at the cashier. The first one of us would buy some gum, and while the purchase was happening, our middle friend, whoever was in the middle, would steal a couple packs of cigarettes from the shelf there. And what our third friend would do, whoever was third in line, would stand. So in case somebody was standing behind us, like, we would wear like a big jacket or like some book bags or whatever. the third person in line at the very back would make themselves kind of look kind of wide, or so anyway, he would visually get in the way of anybody standing behind us, so that they wouldn't see the middle friend stealing the cigarettes. And of course, our friend in the back, he wouldn't buy anything. He was just there as a cover. So that's what we did, and we smoked cigarettes for a while. And I don't remember. The only thing that I remember that came of that I remember, is that I got caught smoking cigarettes. I don't know. I can't remember if my mom. I can't remember if she smelled them on. She probably smelled them on, because like when you're a kid, you think you're like getting away with all this shit. Like it's so easy. Cigarettes smell like shit. So, and it doesn't matter. Like you would have to take a complete shower. You have to take off all your clothes, take a complete shower, use a strong smelling shampoo, and brush your teeth and use mouthwash, and you might be able to get away with not smelling like cigarettes after smoking if you're a middle schooler. Might. And that's assuming that you stay far away from your parents. Now, if you got one of those parents that like gets right up in your face and tries to give you a kiss or a hug all the time, you're fucked. Like, don't even. It takes multiple hours for the cigarette smell to go away. It's really stinky, disgusting shit, and it just stays on you even if you brush your teeth. Because remember, if you brush your teeth and use mouthwash, you're not inhaling your toothpaste and on the mouthwash. You're not inhaling that shit into your lungs. So with the cigarettes, you're inhaling it into your lungs. So even if you do everything on the exterior that will get rid of the smell, your breath will still smell like cigarettes. And if you get anywhere remotely near a parent, especially a mom, because females have better sense of smell than guys do, especially a mom, if you get within breathing distance of a mother who is perceptive to anything like that, they will smell it. And you're going to try to play it off like, oh no, it's a friend of mine who smoked, and this, and blah blah blah. Like, they know you're full of shit. So anyway, I think instances like that went on for a while, and I think after a while my mom had just she just got tired of it, and I think eventually. So I remember I had this, and this is a lot of these stories are gonna kind of loop around and go back to, because there's these issues that I have with invasion of privacy, especially like mothers. If you have a parent that's narcissistic or has borderline personality disorder or that's on the cluster B spectrum, you might want to look all this stuff up. But one of those personality traits is that they think that they have issues with boundaries, and they don't respect you as an individual. They think that you are just an extension of their body, and they have serious issues with basically invading your space. Especially when you're becoming like a teenager and going through puberty and stuff like that, and you kind of start to rebel a little bit, just depending on who you are, and you just want to have your own space, you want to have your own things. You might have like a little thing somewhere that you keep your private stuff like locked up. It might be stupid shit, like maybe like a couple of cigarettes, maybe a condom, maybe like a knife or something that you thought was cool, or some page. I think one of the things that I had was like I had some pages out of a fucking porno magazine. Just stupid shit like that. Just the dumbest like stuff that nobody's getting in trouble, nobody's getting hurt, right? So I used to have this kind of like this locked little cupboard thing in my room, that was part of my TV stand, right? So my TV stand had this little lockbox on the side of it you could lock with a key. And it wasn't like the strongest thing ever. Like, if you really wanted to, all you got to do is pull on it, and it'll bend the little piece of metal in there, and it'll open. So it's not like I'm trying really, really hard to keep this shit secret. It's just like, you're making it pretty obvious that, this is my little secret spot. Please stay out of it, etc. Okay, so one day, my mom basically forces me, because I have the key to this little thing, right? So one day, my mom basically forces me to open that thing, right? And I'm like 12 or 13 or whatever it is, and you don't really know. I was kind of in my particular case, my mother was highly emotionally manipulative and abusive in a certain way, to where it just makes as a kid, it makes you very, very timid and emotionally weak. So it's just like, when she tells you to do something, you just do it, and you're just like, well, fuck, I'm fucked. So anyway, I opened this thing up, and of course the cigarettes are in there. There's various stupid little things in there, like condoms or whatever, like like fucking, like a 12-year-old or 13-year-old is gonna use, and we just think, you just think stuff like that. It's like, oh my god, it's a condom, hee hee. So my cigarettes are in there, right? I think if I remember, there was probably like half a pack of cigarettes left in there. And so what my mom does is she takes me outside to the back, like, patio, and she gives me the pack of cigarettes. I don't think I had a lighter. And I think she goes and gets a book of matches, and she forces me to smoke all of the cigarettes right there. To chain smoke them one after another, after another, after another. And that's like, so an interesting tidbit about my mother then was that she was having an affair with a guy. My dad was out of town a lot for his work, and my mom had this friend over all the time, and he was kind of like this guy who would like help, like, work on the house. And of course, like, I was just completely oblivious to what was going on. Like, well, I wouldn't say I was oblivious to it. Like, I knew what it was, but I was like tuned out of it completely, just like completely shut off, because you could tell what was happening. I'm like, it's really difficult to explain, where it's like you're existing there, but your subconscious knows what's going on. And because your subconscious knows what's going on, you're during your waking life, you're just kind of like in this autopilot mode, which is what I've heard of a lot of people describe. People who are survivors of like sexual abuse, other various childhood trauma. They explain it like you go into autopilot, where it's like your body is moving, but you're not there. Like, you completely check out mentally and emotionally during those moments, or during when all that stuff is happening. So I have a lot of I have a lot of blank spots in my memory, just vast blank spots when it comes to what certain events that happened around that age, or just, going through my whole childhood and puberty, there's huge blank areas. However, I have a lot of good memories with my friends. That was actually one good thing about my childhood, is I had a really, as far as like hanging out with my friends and doing things like that, I had a fucking fantastic childhood. We lived in Seattle. We lived in a suburb of Seattle, and yeah, I had tons and tons of freedom to just, my dad was gone all the time. My mom was having an affair with some dude, so she didn't give a fuck about like really what I was doing. So I had like tons and tons of freedom. Like me and my friends, we'd ride BMX bikes and we'd go like hiking, just doing all kinds of shit, like terrorizing through the town. And I had a really, really, really great childhood with my friends, and there's still like um, there's still a large part of me that's kind of like stuck back then, and back then would be in the mid 90s. So I'm a huge like 90s like skater, snowboarder kid, and I didn't realize the significance of growing up in the Seattle area during the 90s, listening to Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains, Silverchair, Green Day. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, just that. I had no idea the significance of that until much later. I was like, holy shit, like I literally lived in the middle of what the 90s was almost. I mean, it was the middle of the grunge scene. Um, and that's like the 90s was Seattle and Portland and all of that. And I was like right there in the middle of it, running around with my friends, riding around on BMX bikes, breaking bottles and smoking cigarettes and wearing baggy pants and going snowboarding and skateboarding, all kinds of shit. Like I was right there in the middle of it, and I had absolutely no idea. So so what's interesting about the cigarette thing is that yeah, my mom was having an affair with this dude. My dad was gone, and my relationship with my dad was getting real shitty then, because it was like he was kind of like treating me like, you know, like it was my fault that his marriage was on the rocks or some shit. But really, it was my mother. She's just a fucking wretched person. So she's having an affair with this guy, and this guy smokes cigarettes. And it never. I didn't really think about this until way, way later. But her and just how self-absorbed she was, or she is still, it never occurred to her that what she was doing, and this guy that she had around, and the fact that he smoked cigarettes, that maybe that might have influenced me to maybe start smoking cigarettes. But she didn't look at it that way. All she did was punish me by forcing me to smoke half a pack of cigarettes, like chain smoke cigarettes back to back, as punishment, which is, you could basically call that child abuse. And I'll get more into that later. I don't have a relationship really with my mother anymore. Like, I've essentially just kind of disowned her. I personally believe, now she hasn't been diagnosed, but I mean, it's obvious. When you look at the history, her childhood and all this other stuff. But I wouldn't say that she's a full-on narcissist, but I'd say she's definitely she gets hit right on the head with, I would say, personality traits of borderline personality disorder and histrionic. And yeah, definitely those two really big, because she was definitely she definitely has abandonment issues. She had a brother and a sister, who she had to basically fight for resources, and that resources basically selective affection from both of her parents. Her dad was an abusive alcoholic that would beat him up. Her mom did the whole silent treatment thing, and her mom was probably borderline / narcissistic. And this is just decades ago, when none of this, as far as literature and psychology, none of this stuff even existed. back then. Just people just had to deal with it. So it's like I'll give her a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, but she definitely plays this professional victim card. Definitely never apologizes sincerely for anything. Tries to blame other people. She's always trying. Like I said, she pulls the victim card. Has abandonment issues. Extreme boundary issues. Like, she just thinks she can just walk around and just do whatever the fuck she wants to do. So yeah, that was the first part. That was cigarettes. And after that, after she forced me to smoke those cigarettes, I don't really remember doing all that much after that, because we didn't spend too much longer. There was an incident that happened with my mom and the guy that she was having this affair with, right? And I'll go into that later. But sticking with the substances or the drugs, which would be cigarettes, I don't really remember. Nothing really happened after that. I think I would sneak cigarettes here and there, but it never really became a thing again until later, until I started driving, when I would be able to be away for longer periods of time and actually be able to smoke cigarettes when I was in high school. So her punishment didn't do shit. It's just so. I know this has been kind of these are probably all going to be at least 20 or 30 minutes of me just telling stories and just kind of going along like in a chronological order of events. Of course, I am going to kind of like shift around a little bit as I remember certain things, but later on, I get into high school, and I'm just going to foreshadow a little bit on what my other posts are going to be like, or my other uploads are going to be like. Later on, I go into high school. I start drinking, start smoking cigarettes again. I start messing with cocaine, and I start smoking weed. I start smoking weed and masturbating. that was funny. And then gotta love it, I get into the rave scene. About 1999, and I was in it hard for about 3 or 4 years. And whoa, drugs, I didn't even know what they were. Just everything. The most insane, just getting so fucked up out of my mind that I can't even. Anyway, I'll get into more detail about that. But until next time, stay sane. Always seek the truth. Later.